Okay, I'm just going to give it another minute and we'll get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. Okay, let's get going. Time is precious. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's event on flexible working, what leaders need to know to ensure they retain the best talent. My name's Karen Blanc. I'm hosting today's event, but I'm going to hand over to our speakers shortly. I'm the chair of Aberdeen's Access Network. We're a volunteer group. Hopefully most of you are members and are aware of our work, but we're a volunteer group whose aim is to achieve gender balance across Aberdeen's energy sector in all roles at all grades. It's a pleasure to be hosting this conversation with our guests today, and we thank Serica for their support in making this happen. So thank you, Mike. It's our intention to get back to in real life events later in the year, so I look forward to sharing details of those with you in due course. Quick bit of housekeeping. We've intentionally kept today's session to an hour so as we can maximise our time together. We encourage you to engage in the call. It is a one-way broadcast, so if you have questions for our speakers, then I'll encourage you to put them in the chat pane as you think of them, and we'll do our best to pull as many of them in as possible and weave them into the conversation. We'll shortly hear from Anna Whitehouse, the fabulous founder of Mother Puckat and the leader and figurehead of the UK's Flex Appeal campaign. Before we move on to a conversation hosted by our own Emma Behjat, where we'll also be joined by Mike Killeen, so sponsor for today's event, and Serica's VP of Operations. Mike is a role model in leading a flexible workforce, both onshore, you are, both onshore and offshore. We're going to squeeze in as many of your questions as we can, so I remind you again to ask away. Thank you all for joining us. You'll note that we are recording the session. We won't be able to share the session after the call. So we're glad that you're here in real life, and we'll share a bit of a write-up after the call. So Anna, lovely to meet you. I'm going to hand over to you and ask you to tell us a bit about your background, tell us a bit about Flex Appeal, the aim of Flex Appeal, how you got started. We're all yours.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me. So yeah, Flex Appeal began in a very sort of primal maternal place. I'm from Amsterdam, and so I'd lived in Holland for 5-6 years of my life, and I had my first child there. I came to the UK. And the shift in how I was treated as a parent was extraordinary. So in Holland, they have Mama and Papa Dag, which is they don't allow any parent to go back full time. They're like, you are raising the next generation. That's a full time job in itself. So we're going to help you out here. On the NHS over there, they have what's called a Kramzorg, which is a maternity nurse to look after you for 10 days. And the reason they do this is to invest in your mental health. So they think they will save money later on in your life if they invest in supporting you at that pivotal moment where you are, a cocktail of hormones and everyone's crying at everyone else. So it started in a maternal primal place where I'd had that experience, and I came to London and I was running the gauntlet, I think we used to call it, where I'd leave work at sort of 4:59 p.m, get to nursery pickup. I was 6 minutes late for nursery pickup. My daughter had those big Bambi eyes, a little Paw Patrol backpack on, looking at me going, why am I the last one sitting here? And I was crying, she was crying, and I thought, do you know what? I don't think this is my fault. I don't think this is your fault. I think this system isn't set up for us to succeed. And I say us because when I actually looked into it, the burden of childcare is, still strapped to female shoulders. This is a campaign absolutely for everyone. But where it started was in that human maternal place where I looked into it and found 54,000 women every single year were pushed out of the workforce for simply having a baby. I then started conversations around the male side of that, men who wanted to step up, but it was seen as emasculating to look after your own child. I then started speaking to people who didn't care about children, did not want a family, and said, you know what? I would really like to, further my art career on a Friday. And I started thinking, why have other countries got this so right? I then found a quote that I think at the time was quite extreme to read, but bears some real semblance to where we sit today. Douglas Copeland, the author, he said, the 9 to 5 is barbaric. I truly think we will look back on the 9 to 5 like we did child slavery in the 18th century. And it's an extreme view, but actually, when we did our TED talk, we started with visuals of a battery farm where you put hens in little cages. And our second slide was of an office where you put humans in little cages. And ultimately, the hens that were free range made better eggs. They were happier, healthier, they had longer lives, productivity was up. And that is a fairly sort of base David Attenborough-esque analogy to draw. But we really wanted to question at that point where I put my flexible working request in and it was rejected for potentially opening the floodgates to others seeking flexible working. I wanted to question, alongside my husband, because this is not a maternal campaign, this is a human campaign, why we cannot open those floodgates. What is the fear? Because flexible working, which is actually inclusive working, I actually want to move it forward. It's not something an employer has to do. It is very simple. Do you, as a leader, want to include the best talent at the table? Talent with caring responsibilities, talent that is living with disabilities, talent that has anxiety. The HR director at Virgin said she doesn't like children, but do you know what? She likes going to the V&A on a Friday morning because there's no people around, and then she works maybe a little bit on a Saturday. It is for everyone. And I think my point with Flex Appeal, yes, it's from a primal human place, but is actually for businesses to put humans at the heart of their business, but for business benefit. It is about cold, hard cash. That is the bit that I found was missing from the conversation. Was I'm not some knackered mum just wanted to see more of my baby. This is about people opening up those floodgates to a swathes of talent that can build your business. So it is not flexible working for me, it is inclusive working. And that's why I'm here today to speak about how this is not a revolution. I've been branded many things in this campaign. God, she's trying to change the working world when we all want to eat pret in city centres. God, I miss those water cooler moments. No, I've never had a really great water cooler experience, to be absolutely honest, but that's by the by. This is not a revolution. This is about evolution in a digital world that is willing and ready, as we are experiencing right now in this very talk. So I'm going to hand back to you, Emma, but thank you so much for listening today. I'm so excited to be talking to Mike and to have these conversations. 5 years ago, they weren't being had. So it means a great deal on a human level.
Thank you, Anna. That was really insightful. I know personally I am a mother, so everything you said at the start was one, educational for me, and very, very emotional as well, because to hear how it's done differently abroad to how we're doing it here, I think sometimes we don't actually have line of sight to that. So it's interesting to see other people's perspectives and to know that it can be different. Like you said, we will be going into a guided conversation, and I'm sure our audience, thanks for joining us. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to drop them into the chat that's just going. And then, we might be bringing those into the conversation as we go along, or if not, we will try and address all of them at the end. But at this point, I would like to invite Mike to join our conversation. Mike, if you introduce yourself and then also share your passion of flexible working and give us a bit of insights of what your thoughts are.
Okay, so Good afternoon, I guess it is. Yeah, it is afternoon by now. So good afternoon, everybody. Mike Killeen. I'm the VP Operations for Serica Energy, based in Aberdeen. I have two roles, one which is the VP of Operations, and the other is the head of our Aberdeen office, which for the last couple of years has been weird to be the head of an office that doesn't exist. But hey, there you go. Do I have a passion for flexible working? I don't know if I have a passion for flexible working. I have a passion for making the best out of the people that work for us and getting the best people to work for us. And one of the things that helps with that is being open to being flexible. And I guess I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. And one of the things that I noticed with lockdown was I got to see more of my kids fundamentally. They, and that was like, oh, that's quite interesting. Like that. They seem to quite like that. So can that carry on? And so that's what opened the conversation with us about, right, we were forced into a situation we would never have gone, but actually it was not bad. There's some good stuff in it. So what doors does that open? What barriers did that break down that we don't want to reintroduce? And so I guess that passion has come from that piece of saying, well, not everything was bad. There were some really good things. So if that's unlocked our thinking, how do we build upon it?
Great, thank you, Mike. And yeah, I think that's definitely feeding into our thoughts as well. And Anna, I know you've already mentioned as well how, it's your campaign started because you were a mother and you moved from Amsterdam over here and you've seen a difference in, I guess, how new parents are treated. And I kind of wanted to raise the point that there is still a perception that flexible working is for working mothers or for working parents. Do you think that perception is still correct? And do you think it's still around?
Yes, I think, unfortunately, I think we all had high hopes when the pandemic did hit. And I think, bear in mind, 2 weeks before the 23rd of March 2020, I had companies going, oh, it won't work for us. I'm so sorry. We love what you do, but it won't work in our industry. It was interesting when the pandemic hit and we went into lockdown, how quickly they had to make it work, how it actually was always possible, how if those companies that did not log on and zoom in quite simply had to shut down. So I think when cold, hard cash was at stake, it was fascinating what was possible overnight across industry. So what was interesting there was, coming back to your question, was that it was then made accessible for everyone. Like Mike said, suddenly CEOs who'd been strapped to their desks, coming back to the battery hen analogy, were freed up to see more of their families, to recognize. I mean, we started seeing into the backgrounds of CEOs. They were humanized in a way that they aren't within companies. And the issue we had was that when you look back to SARS and Ebola, women's equality goes backwards in a pandemic. So we knew that to start with. So, has this helped progression for women? No. But what it has done is leveled the playing ground in terms of who's able to get access to part-time work. Historically, it was women. Now you're seeing men stepping up against that emasculating narrative. You're seeing men going, no, I want to see my kids. Men like Mike going, I really enjoyed seeing my kids. I can't see any more of those kind of hapless dad memes, like daddy daycare and like he's just part-time worker here in the house. No, back it up. I had, before the pandemic, a dad get in touch with me and said, I asked my boss if I could have flexible working on a Tuesday and a Wednesday to pick up my daughter from nursery. My boss's response was, can't your missus do that? And he came back and he said, well, my missus is a brain surgeon, so you can pick a lane. And you do not need to be at the top of the medical profession for your partner to be afforded that flexibility. But what we are seeing now, linking it back obviously to that equality in terms of part-time work, we're seeing men finally stepping up, but finally removing that emasculating, God, if I look after my children, I'll lose my job. Women are still bearing the burden of childcare. 1 in 10 flexible working requests goes through for men, 4 in 10 goes through for women. So no, it's not equal. But are we moving forward? Are we, in Boris Johnson's mind, trying to build back better? I'm actually into building back differently. And I think the answer to that is we're at the start a very long journey of rebuilding our working world, where yes, men step up and step up to the plate, quite literally, the domestically loaded plate.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think all women would definitely applaud that. We want to see that change. And, I think that men would want to see that change. But like you say, it's that perception of if they do put in those requests that it's deemed emasculating, that's stopping them, not a desire to want to stop.
But also, I think the language is so wrong around things. So my dad, who was quite against what I was doing at first, he's at the top of the legal profession, and he was sort of burnt out right into the end of his life, And he said, "What are you fighting for? I don't understand this." Only recently, we had lunch, and he said, "I think the wording we use is wrong around job sharing, for example." So if we talk about that slacker narrative around part-timers, I've always impressed part-time isn't part asked or part talented or part educated. It's simply you get paid a little bit less for doing fewer days. And my dad said, why do we call it job sharing? Why don't we call it job pairing, where you pair two brilliant minds together? That ultimately says to an employer, you're getting a 2-for-1 here, not, God, we're having to section this off and it's going to be an administrative nightmare. It's a lot of the language around it is wrong, like flexible working. No, it's inclusive working. So no, it's not shifted yet, but we're in the embers of a pandemic. So I hope it is moving forward as quickly as we can push it.
Yeah, and I hope that the change that happened during the pandemic stays. And just to kind of touch or bring Mike into this, because I know obviously the Flex appeal, no, the Axis, I'm relabeling us now. The Axis network is focused in the energy sector. And the energy sector, I would say, is probably one of the most challenging ones to bring in for certain, certainly for certain job roles, to make that flexible. So Mike, what are your thoughts on that regard?
Well, I was going to say, I just come back to the piece about working mums, especially, was that when we went into the pandemic, we did what we did, every lockdown. And when we were starting to think about coming out of it, I actually spoke one-to-one with all of our staff and said, look, how's it been? How you feel? We did a lot of that during lockdown, and kind of just touched their opinion of what are you thinking about, how you feel that you want to work coming out of the pandemic. And it was quite a guarded conversation. Some people were very clear, but some people were quite guarded. And then in most of those conversations, I said, well, I'll give you my opinion. My opinion is actually this has been all right. I'm not sure I want to go back to the office 5 days a week, maybe 3 days a week, or sometimes, or at appropriate times. And as soon as I opened up and said, well, I'm kind of don't want to be in the office 5 days a week every week going forwards, I quite often got an open thing was saying, well, actually, you know what? And what we broadly got was about 85% of our staff, male and female, basically said, kind of like to do maybe 2 or 3 days in the office. That would work for me. Some said, look, I want to be back in the office 100%. Get it. That's the right thing for them and for their personal circumstances. And some people kind of said, kind of never want to see you all again. But I want to carry on working. But actually, things have changed in the pandemic. My other half has got a different role, and we've potentially moved, or we would like to move to make our lives easier. And we sort of said, well, yeah, okay, so why isn't that possible? And so our drive to change our flexible working policy was based on the fact that the majority of our staff said we'd like something different. We don't want it to be this, which is the lockdown, but we don't want it to be what it was either. And so that was where we came from. And I think what that's done for us in the energy industry, I mean, the first thing I always say in the energy industry is we talk about job share and can't do it and all these kind of things. The most regulated job that we have in the energy industry is an OIM, which you have to have an external assessment on, and it's a job share because they do it on a rota. So if your most regulated role that you have can be job share, then why can't any other ones? And it's easier to job share something in the office than it is to job share something that's on a platform hundreds of miles away. So why is the reluctance? Because we accept it for our most crucial role. So yeah, I guess to me, it's being open to it. I remember a conversation in a previous company where there were two women I spoke to. Both of them wanted to come back part-time from maternity, both of whom had differing skill sets, and the combined individual was perfect for a quite senior role that we had. And we said, well, why couldn't you two job share? And they're like, well, would you accept that? And it's like, well, you wouldn't get the job on your own and you wouldn't get the job on your own, but actually the combination of the two of you and the fact that we get effectively 6 days out of a 5-day week because you both wanted to do 3 days. Wow, this would be amazing. And it was just opening up that conversation. And in the end, there was a reorganization that didn't happen. But why couldn't we do that? It's just there's no reason we can't.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear, and I really liked how you pointed out the fact that an OIM job offshore, where we have that rotation, is essentially a job share. But I think we label it as a rotation, and that's seen differently. The perception, as soon as you say job share, like you mentioned earlier, Anna, there's a different perception around it, and I think changing those perceptions maybe will open up organizations to accepting these types of roles, because it's definitely possible.
And I think it's worth pointing that, and everybody who ever interacts with multiple OIMs offshore, they're not all the same. They have a different skill set. They each bring something different to the role, and we give them different responsibilities. So they do the day job, but they all do something different. And some might do staff development, some might do more on maintenance, some might do stuff on projects. But we build on the fact that they've got different skills and they've got different strengths, and it's a bunch of different individuals doing the role. So why can't that be the same onshore and in the office?
I feel quite emotional hearing you speak, Mike, if I'm being really honest.
I told you it was a role model. Yeah.
Honestly, because I can't tell you how many doors have been slammed in my face trying to explain exactly what you are explaining, the exhaustion of going, this is a way forward for your business. Like you said, you've just explained it. If we pair these two people together, we're going to get more for it. And you know what? If you don't, you measure that. That's a recruitment thing. The point I get so often is, oh God, well, one person ended up, watching Homes Under the Hammer and they're undercrackers 24/7 and we couldn't trust them. One person brought the whole company down. It's like, well, that's a recruitment issue. Recruit the right people, the right minds, pair them together or allow them to work in a way that works for both sides. And that's, I think the point is a relationship. It's a relationship. I know it's overused. People know it's a relationship of trust, but ultimately it's a relationship. An employee isn't going to get everything they want. An employer isn't getting everything they want. There's a compromise in the middle, but ultimately it's about moving forward with the right people. And when we formed our coalition, we found the only job that could not be flexible in the entire world was probably on an oil rig. Actually, if you look at what kinds of flex you can offer, core hours, job sharing, compressed hours, whatever it would look like, on an oil rig is probably the furthest extreme where it would be hard to sort of do that. But even then, I think it would be possible. So, yeah, I just wanted to say on a personal note, just hearing a man at the top of a business saying those things, like you said, it's about leading. You had that conversation, which opens then up the conversation to others who think, God, will I lose my job if I say to Mike, I want to work 4 days? If Mike's saying, well, this is what I would like to do, and I mean, to be honest, I'll be really frank, I didn't always love seeing my children in the pandemic, but if you're standing there, I mean, the pandemic was, a tale of two sides, I'd say. But it's those conversations like Robert Reetbrook at PepsiCo, who introduced the Leaving Loudly policy. It cost nothing to the business. And he simply said one day, can we all just not leave our coats on the end, on our chairs and edge out because we're so nervous about, not being strapped to our desks 24/7. He said, leave loudly. Tell me if you're going to do the nursery pickup. I want us to hear it. I want to hear your lives outside of work. But it took him at the top. It takes managers to allow that to trickle down to that nervousness I think a lot of people still have of saying, I want to work a different way, but also I need this salary and I don't want to jeopardize that. Or like we said, coming back to the male reticence for getting flexible working, that, it's emasculating. It's not. So yeah, no, it meant a lot hearing you say that.
I'm going to ask Emma, can I pull in, there's a couple of
Yeah, of
questions
course.
in the chat that are kind of a mix about hybrid and flexible working. So I was going to ask you, Anna, we've got a quote from you that says flexible working has nothing to do with working from home. And I was going to ask if you would talk a little bit about how flexible is different from hybrid working.
Yes, so a lot of our campaign is obviously, I genuinely, when the pandemic hit, I thought, well, I think my work here is done. I genuinely thought, well, we all proved the text there. We're all working from home. And I say working from home is one element of flexible working, as Mike highlighted: job shares, compressed hours, core hours. But this binary argument we have in government right now, from Boris Johnson saying he doesn't trust himself working from home because he likes to nibble a bit of cheese and then he gets back to his laptop and he's forgotten what he's doing. You know, that sort of binary working from home versus working from the office, that's not where the argument needs to sit. That's where you know, the current Tory argument is, because it's easy to have that black and white approach, but it's actually what Mike's highlighted, and most CEOs, most managers I speak to, is that hybrid model where I think, if you ask my flexible working utopia, it is that. It is where we can ebb and flow between HQ and home, not being owned. So removing that battery farm mentality, but with that free range technology. It's really ensuring that there's not that owner and pet dynamic where I think I know we do 468 hours of unpaid overtime a year as employees. Let that sink in. Flexible working has been working for years, but one-way traffic towards the employer. That is not anywhere else in Europe. We are in this bubble of, you know, sitting at our desk till 9 p.m. and coming back to Amsterdam. My boss, I remember one day, the New York office, the London office were calling in going, we need to have a very urgent meeting at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. And I was working at Tommy Hilfiger. I was a copywriter there, and I remember him on the phone. He goes, "Oh, it's shoes, it's handbags. We can do it tomorrow. It's fine." And you know, you've got to pick the moment. Sometimes there are times when we all have to graft and we have to get together, and you've got that collective group mentality of going, "This is a urgent situation," but to get everyone to stay for something that could wait for the next day, it takes that ownership from leaders at the top. So yes, I think we're moving forward, but it takes people like Mike to lead the charge, I suppose.
I think that just to build on that, I could think of an example, especially from a previous employer where it was done, and we've done it here as well, where we've had people coming back from maternity leave who want to work part-time, want to work 3 days a week, but you know they're in a role where they're going to get a phone call in the evening, and you know they're going to get a phone call at the weekend. And so what we've done is say, well, okay, you contracted hours, you're saying you're coming into the office for 3 days, but we'll give you 3.5 or 4 days worth of pay, because we know you're going to get phone calls, and we don't need to resent the fact that you're going to get phone calls, because that makes our support easier. And we acknowledging the fact that some weeks you won't get phone calls, and hey, you got slightly more out of it this week than we did, but there'll be other weekends where you end up with 3 or 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon where you're supporting the operation. So let's recognise that as well. So we've done that a couple of times with people. I know my previous employer did that with a few people, and we've done it as well, because it's just a recognition of the fact that people don't just do 3 days a week. If they're committed to the job, which these people are, of course people are, they'll end up doing phone calls out of hours. They'll end up doing some other business. So let's recognise that, and just make them feel that it is being recognised and they're being rewarded for it, rather than resenting the fact that they're having to do these phone calls and no one's giving them anything for it.
Yeah,
It's not
that's
hard.
so refreshing. That's so refreshing to hear, Mike. I've not heard of that being done before, and I know, like, I'm a recently new mum. I say recently, she's 16 months. I guess recently back to recently a working mum, and I think sometimes people may think that because you're a working mum, your ambition or your desire to progress isn't as there, because you have these fixed things that are a real passion to you. Like, my child is obviously my priority, but just because my child's my priority doesn't mean that I don't have my own professional desires and ambitions. So it's really nice to hear that when you have people come in and making requests for just a 3-day week, that you're seeing that actually, no, they do deliver, and you're putting faith in them and then rewarding them with a 3.5-day pay. That's so nice to hear. And I guess along that similar vein, we know what flexible working offers to the individual and how it can, transform that work-life balance. But in terms of what it gives back to the company, to the employer, What are your thoughts on that, both Anna and Mike?
I mean, I can give a quick example of somebody I've spoken to recently, which might feed into what Mike's been saying. So James Clary, he's the operations equivalent of Mike at Coutts Bank. And he said, much like the Robert Reitbrook example of a very simple thing that can change lives without cost, he sat his 40-strong team down and gave them 10 minutes each to explain the rub in their day. So he looked them in the eye and he said, what's the rub in your day? Some were saying wanting to pick up their children. Some were saying that their relationships was a little bit on the rocks and they needed to see more of their partner. A myriad of reasons. And he couldn't give them everything they wanted, but he sat them all in a room after having these conversations individually and got them to talk as a group as to how they could cover each other as a team. And within 3 months, within his department, productivity had gone up 40%.
Wow.
40%. And he was described internally, he said, as going rogue. You know, that it was a negative thing that he'd done. And the company was not particularly happy that he'd gone rogue on this. And he had to present to the board how he'd gone rogue and why he was making so much more money out of the people he'd invested in, a little bit of time in, 10 minutes each. And he didn't lead with a stack of stats or research or how he'd done it. He had that all bundled up ready for them to read later. But he started with a photo of his secretary who'd become engaged to her boyfriend in that period of time. And he said, I did this for this. You can read the results, but it's really basic. It's not going rogue. It's putting people, humans, their needs at the center of your business. And then the offset of that, coming back to productivity, we know it works, is cold hard cash. And if it's not, then you need to look at how you've recruited. Stop blurring the lines between flexible working and perhaps rushed or bad recruitment. That's where I get frustrated. They are separate things. Once you have the right people in place and you've done what Mike says and said, how can we help you do this job to the best of your capabilities so you aren't stressed, your mental health isn't being pressured, that you're seeing your partner occasionally, you're hugging your kids. How can we facilitate that? Let them go, measure how they're doing and stop looking at where people are sitting and start looking at what people are doing. Then you will make ultimately more money. So I think, you know, that's probably the most human example I could give.
Well, thank you for that. It was really insightful. Mike, I guess
Yeah,
you're
I
in
mean,
a slightly different position. What's your thoughts?
yeah, I mean, I guess let's be honest. I'm in this to make money. Serica is in this to make money. We're not going to do something if we don't think there's a benefit. And we're going to make money. You know, there's two examples I can kind of give. So one is we put a lot of time. You know, we're not the biggest energy company in Aberdeen. We are competing with super majors who can offer people global travel and all these kind of bits and pieces. So we need to, you know, when it goes to attracting talent and doing going recruitment, we need to show why you would come and work for us. And we put a lot of time and effort into recruiting people and getting good people. And we have you know, one spin-off benefit that's come out of all this that was not anticipated, never saw it coming, but really pleased it did. We have one of our business analysts, fantastic person, does a great job. Took us ages to recruit her, and her partner is in the military. And what we hadn't figured out was that obviously he gets relocated. She was having the internal debate of, do I stay with my career and carry on working here, but strain my relationship? Do I give up my career and travel with my partner and start a new career somewhere else? And she was starting to have that mental discussion. We didn't know that. Some may have done, I didn't. By offering the flexible working, so our flexible working policy basis, you can be in the office as many days as you want or as few days as you want, and you can work anywhere from within the UK for basically tax reasons and the fact that if we have a major emergency, we need all hands on deck, we need to be able to get people here, and easy enough from the UK, tricky if they're not in the UK. So yeah, it can be anywhere in the UK. She came to us and said, oh, that's brilliant. I don't have to worry about this anymore. I'll carry on my career and I can still follow. And And we're a company that signed the Armed Forces Covenant to support the Armed Forces. This is a spin-off benefit that we didn't realise would do that. But B, it's meant that someone who we took some time and effort to recruit, whom we value very highly, now thinks we're a good place to work and wants to stay with us because it lets her continue to do that. And it's like, oh, I didn't see that coming, but fantastic. Hey, there's a real benefit to us. And the second one is, and it comes into some of the offshore piece that you spoke about, Anna. Again, we're not the biggest company. We have a lot of very experienced individuals who've got 20, 30 years and lots of knowledge, but they don't want to keep going offshore forever. They want to retire from going offshore. And the normal route, let's be honest, is they would quit. They would take the retirement. They'd set themselves up as a limited company. We'd bring them back in as a consultant at some point to do an onshore-based role where we pay them a ridiculously high day rate to do that. What we've been able to work with a couple of our people at the moment, and speaking about a couple of others, is they're no longer working offshore. They're effectively retired from offshore, and we've got them on a reduced contract, working from home, supporting various projects and stuff. So we've retained the knowledge. They know the company, and we've got an in-house consultant that we can get those projects managed. I think we've not changed our headcount broadly. We've promoted some people offshore, but we've not had those people go, well, this doesn't work for me anymore. And that's been really beneficial to us, because otherwise we would have had to go out and get a consultant in to do that piece of work, to run that piece of work for us. We would have paid probably more money, and we wouldn't have had the intimate knowledge of us and our business and that relationships. And because they know the relationships, that's probably gone smoother than it would have been of bringing someone in and bring them up to speed. So it's something we're open to going forward, and we're actually looking more at. It's like, so how do we have someone work 3 days from Falkirk to support the offshore operation, because we really want to retain those skills, but he doesn't want to travel offshore anymore, and I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really good to hear. And I think one of the biggest examples of the benefits to a company that flexible working can offer, from what I've read about, is the fact of you retain your talent. And that's exactly what you've been saying, Mike. By offering those flexible options, you've retained that knowledge, which is vital, because if they've got all of that experience, you don't want them to take it somewhere else into another company. You want to be able to retain that in-house. I'm kind of just taking a different tangent with this now. Obviously, we've talked about the benefits to the individual, the benefits to the corporation, but then there are still, I'm sure, people out there that maybe are reluctant to ask for it, because there's still biases around flexible working, in terms of it can limit your promotion, it can, just because of the associated biases. What do you think that we can do to try and address those biases? And, if you could talk about what those biases are in a bit more detail for our audience, that would be great.
Yeah, so this is a good opportunity to be able to say that I'm working on a Flex Appeal app right now that's going to be launching in September. And it's basically